In this episode of CMOTalk, Shelly Kramer and I discuss whether or not your CEO or executive team should be on social media. And I advise that if you have the time, please hang with us for the whole show because you may be surprised about where we start and where we end up. Welcome back to another episode of CMO Talk. I'm Dan Newman, and I'm here with my always favorite person and co-host, Shelly Kramer. Shelly, how are you today?
I'm great, Dan, and it's so nice to know I'm your favorite person. That just warms the cockles of my cold little heart.
Oh, just do me a favor and don't listen to any other podcasts I might be on.
Because I know you say that everywhere.
It may have been one of my strongest sales approaches when I'd get on the phone with anybody and I'd be like, hey, how's my favorite Shelly today? And they'd be like, you're the only Shelly I know. And I'd be like, yeah, but that doesn't make it any less meaningful, does it?
Yes, it does. It makes it a lot less meaningful. Well, I'm excited. I'm excited about the topic that we're going to talk about today, Dan. And I'm just going to jump in there and tell people what it is. We were talking in advance of the show because we prepare so many hours in advance, and which is sarcasm. And we were talking about a piece of an infographic that Dan saw floating around in the social media space about the need to mobilize employees and senior leaders, gain improved trust in the marketplace. And the data point said that 82% of buyers trust a company more when the CEO and senior leadership are active on social. And 77% of buyers are more likely to buy from a company whose CEO uses social media. And without having any conversation about this, Dan suggested we talk about this topic today on CMO Talk. And without us having any conversation, I thought, well, I hope that Dan isn't going to show up and be an advocate for this because I completely disagree. And so we have some views on this topic and that we want to talk about. We want to kind of dish about a little bit. And so anyway, Dan, I'm going to throw it over to you now.
Well, first of all, I think we have a great way to rile up our Twitter audience because we just need to start tweeting out on this episode of CMO Talk. We share why we agree that CEOs should not be spending their day on Twitter and Facebook. Because yes, overall, Shelly, you and I actually do agree on this. I'll give you a little bit about my reasoning because I want to jump in first in case we're the same. Because
you want to take my thoughts that I've already shared with you. Whatever.
Yeah. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take credit for your thoughts right now. But the bottom line of what's going on here is that you and I deal day in and day out with CEOs, presidents, and executives for B2B companies anywhere from $5 and $10 million up to $1 billion. And more. And the bottom line is when you're looking at the way these companies run, if I was an employee, a stockholder, a shareholder, a stakeholder in any of these organizations, and I had found out that the CEO was spending the majority of his day curating content for Twitter, chatting in LinkedIn groups, or BSing with their friends on Facebook, I would probably be a little bit concerned about how the heck my 100,000, 50,000, or 50 employees are being led and managed on a day-to-day basis, given the CEO's responsibility to the shareholders and the bottom line of a company.
I agree, even though I'm pretty sure I did already say that. But I think that to me, again, CEOs, to me, a CEO's job is to lead and grow the business, and in some ways to be the face of the business, in some instances to be the face of the business, not in all instances. So I do very much agree with the fact that you stole the thought that I shared earlier.
You're the only one who could have ever thought.
No, I am.
Okay.
But I think more importantly, our business, Dan and I work a lot in the B2B space. We have a lot of clients for whom we do social media community management, or we do corporate blogging, or we help develop their digital strategies, a lot of different things. And my point in telling you that is that we are elbows deep in the trenches all day, every day. And if we walked into our clients' offices and tried to blow that smoke that you, Mr. CEO, need to spend your time on social media channels, we would be laughed out of the building, because I think that's not what a lot of senior executives believe, that there's not that kind of adoption. I think for every, I don't know, 20 companies that you might look at, if you're lucky, you're going to find one CEO that's savvy about social media networks and channels, and who's actually using them in any kind of a meaningful way. And I don't necessarily think that's a bad thing. So I think that sometimes what happens when you start talking about social media, especially when you start having conversations with people who are immersed in the social media space, it's all too easy for those people to become, chest beaters and to make these proclamations that, people will only buy from people whose CEOs are using social and all that kind of stuff. I mean, that's just craziness. And that's an expectation, it's a bar that if you try to set it for your senior leadership, for your, not only for your CEO, but for your senior leadership to have an expectation that they participate in social on a day-to-day basis, I think it's crazy. And it doesn't mean they don't do it at all, but that's not their job.
Right. And before everybody out there, starts putting posters of us on the wall and throwing darts, because, we have a lot of fans in the marketing space. We have a lot of marketers, CMOs, and marketing leaders who are desperately trying to get their CEOs to see the value. Nothing that we are saying right now means we don't believe social media is important for a brand strategy or for a business. What we're specifically talking about is the value of a CEO being active on social media. And there is a big difference between a CEO being active and a CEO that understands how content marketing, social media, digital, paid, owned, and earned can drive business for a brand. And having said that, I want to go one step further. We're not saying that a CEO and their public persona shouldn't necessarily have a social media presence. We're just saying that their personal time may not be best served. And if you look at the offices of some of the most prestigious leaders in the world, they're using social, right? President Obama uses social. Leaders, Warren Buffett uses social, but they're not on social all day. And if we were to get under the hood of a lot of these people who are on social, I bet you we would find out that while their handles are putting out content, more times than not, they are not pressing the buttons.
And that's okay. I think that when you think about it, you and I travel a lot. We attend a lot of conferences that are put on by big brands. And I think about some of the times that I've been sitting in a conference and listening to, a senior leader with IBM, or a senior leader with some Dell, or a senior leader with HP, or huge companies, and if they share as part of their presentation their Twitter handles, and I go over there because of course I do, and I see that they have 137 followers and they've tweeted 4 times, and they're trying, and they put that out there in terms of here's where I am on Twitter. I think that that's kind of a little bit of a misstep in terms. You don't want to put a foot forward that's not your best foot forward. If you happen to be somebody like IBM's Sandy Carter, who's all over social, who has 30,000 followers on Twitter, who's tweeted 17,000 times, who is truly 100% active and involved and engaged in the space, who understands the value. Of course, that's been a part of her business. Social business has been what she's been involved in for that brand. So I just think you do find senior leaders who understand these channels, who use these channels to drive brand awareness, to engage with brand advocates and potential customers and that sort of thing. But I think that you have to do it in a way that you don't have a uniform across the board expectation of everyone, and you have to be realistic about what your people can or can't do. But if you have a major senior executive who's presenting at a conference, it would make sense on a topic that's important to your business, it would make sense to me that you would spend some time 30, 60, 90, 120 days in advance of an event building a legitimate presence for that senior executive on social media channels so that you could really maximize that appearance, that opportunity, that investment in a presentation or whatever. And I think a lot of times brands don't think about that.
Right. Well, I think the brand building and the publicity and PR that's associated with a senior leader and their clout with a C, not the clout with a K, is that they do have people that want to hear from them. I see leaders from companies, you mentioned Sandy, again, not a CEO, but a GM of a business group.
Right.
We see leaders from Dell. We see leaders from Cisco. I've got one that a gentleman at Cisco that leads their collaboration practice. I'm always impressed by how engaged he is, but he's in a collaboration space and he's using it to push a collaboration message. You will never see his content off message. And that's kind of one of the things I think is really interesting is I think there is a place for them to curate and share and create a channel of information going out. And when they even to engage with specific clients or potential clients that make sense. But I think along the way, what these businesses and enterprises really need to think about is how do we build a constant presence for these people, engage mostly on their behalf, and then filter out the noise and only really ask them to directly get involved or engage when when it escalates to a certain level. And I think that's really where your either internal or external marketing team or your social team needs to help, because I do believe the individuals have a little bit more influence than a brand sometimes in terms of connecting. People
Absolutely.
do tend to believe when an individual shares. But I also believe that individual, right, if a C-suite executive at one of these Fortune 50 companies like the ones we just talked about is on Twitter and he's actually trying to respond, or she's actually trying to respond to every message that's coming through on a LinkedIn or a Twitter platform, they're going to get buried and they're going to get off target.
Right. Well, and
accomplish every day.
And potentially say the wrong thing at the wrong time. I mean, there's always that possibility too, which leads me to another point. I had a client for a long time who was a global engineering consulting firm, and they had 25 global practices all over the United States, actually all over the world. And they had a very low adoption rate of their senior leaders for social, but every now and then there would be somebody who kind of got it and who was playing around with something. And we had a guy in a market that a senior leader. He's not the CEO of the company, but he's the CEO at that level of this particular global practice in a market. And part of our job was to kind of monitor social activity across the board for the company. We did all their social media community management. We shared all their content. And I would regularly see this senior level executive post things that I thought that kind of gave me pause, that were either super political or just kind of took a side of something that made me a little nervous. Because what people don't understand sometimes is that, you can say all you want, these tweets are my own or these opinions are my own, but when you represent a company, what you say can ultimately have an impact on the company. So I think there's some danger involved in that too. If you have a pool of senior executives who are interested in dipping their toe or who already are dipping their toes, I think it's really important to consider training and ongoing training and conversations about what's appropriate, what you need to be careful of. The fact that you really probably wouldn't say anything on a social media channel that you wouldn't stand up in front of a room full of people of different religious backgrounds or different political backgrounds and share your views. So, and I think sometimes people lose sight of that because it's just you sitting in front of your computer or your phone, and sometimes they lose sight of how potentially big that communication could be.
I love that you said that too, Shelley. I wrote a post. It had to be 2 or 3 years ago. I remember I actually wrote it. It was something that I was flamed about, and because I read something that somebody wrote that was really inflammatory, and then I read their Twitter handle, and I kind of called them out on Twitter about it, and they came back and they said, well, this isn't the company's view, this is my view. And then in their little bio, they had the whole thing that was, views are my own. And I decided
Right.
I had to write a post that basically more or less said that the views are my own does not basically, condone you being an idiot.
No, it doesn't.
Online.
It doesn't. And the views are my own is really BS, because when you work for a company, every single person that works for a company is a brand ambassador of that company, period, end of story. So, you can keep your views in your living room, and that's fine. But if you're going to step out into the public sector in any way whatsoever, and your name and the brand of your company is attached to it, those views aren't your own. They're just not.
Okay. Yeah, well that's exactly right. And anytime you say anything when you work for a company, you will be associated with that company. That's why people that do stupid things get fired, not just on social media, but people that do stupid things that end up in the media end up without jobs. And it's because companies do not want to deal with the PR fallout of people making bad decisions. And this could take us down a whole nother mousetrap, into talking about, our reputation offline and online and why that matters. But I just keeping it on the specific topic of disclaimers and of executives basically realizing that what you say does matter. And sometimes that's why I even say having comms, PR, or having some sort of marketing team manage your social presence if you're a senior executive may be better use of social for you than you actually trying to do it yourself, even if you are one of those believers that buys into it, because a lot of times people don't know where to draw that line. And if you're in a very visible role, you got to be extremely careful. In roles like ours where we own the companies that in such, like, we can maybe take a little bit more risk because we know that if we do something stupid, it's going to affect us directly.
Right.
When you're representing Wall Street or shareholders or a board of directors, it's very different.
And so having started this conversation saying that we absolutely disagree that CEOs need to be on social and using social media channels, I will backtrack a little bit and say that I do think there are some benefits. And, of course, I'm somebody that was an early adopter of social media channels. I've used them to grow my business, our clients' businesses. So there's nobody who's more of a fan of the value of social and who's also realistic about what kind of value social can deliver than I am or than you are. And I think that there's something to be said. So even though the expectation across the board that CEOs should participate in social media is, that's arguable. That said, I think there's some benefits. I think there's a lot of benefits. I think that it sends a message to your employees, especially your younger employees for whom social is just a way of life and a fact of life and a channel that they use, a variety of different channels that they use. So I think there's improved communication. I think that, overall your brand image, when you look at companies whose senior leadership or whose CEOs are out there and engaged, and and whether it's Michael Dell, whether it's, I'm thinking of, there's a whole bunch of CEOs, Tony Hsieh, Zappos CEO. There's other, I'm sure you can think of some, but I think that there is an improved potential for improved brand image, provided your CEO isn't an idiot. And I think that there's maybe it's an illusion, maybe not, but I think there's a perceived greater transparency about the company as a whole when a senior leader, certainly a CEO, is willing to step up and be one of the people and have conversations with customers, with prospective customers, with naysayers, with the media. I think that we come from a long history of sort of CEOs and senior leadership being, surrounded by pretty high walls, pretty impenetrable walls. And I think what we see as we move more into the digital space, I think we see those walls coming down. And I think so I think there are some benefits, and I think that from an employee standpoint, I think from a customer and prospect standpoint, I think there are some benefits. So the challenge is for the senior leadership team, for your CEOs, whatever, is to figure out, is it right for us? Is it right for our company? Is it right for my personal brand? Does it add value to what it is we're trying to do as a company? Is it add value for what we're trying to do in the industry that we serve? How does this fit into what we're doing with our content marketing and corporate blogging efforts? How does this fit into what we're doing from an event business? Are we doing, is our sales team traveling and doing sales or trade shows, and would it be beneficial for us to have those sorts of things? So I think you have to ask yourself those questions, but I do think there's value. You just have to figure out how it fits into everything else that you're doing and then make it work.
So are you changing your mind?
No, I'm not changing my mind. I just think that to go into this conversation like so many people do, and say all CEOs and senior leaders should be on social media because people will trust you more and people will buy from you more and blah, blah, blah. I think that is an unrealistic expectation. I think that depending on the company, depending on your goals, I don't know, think about it as maybe having strategy, maybe, but depending on the company, depending on your goals, depending on the personality of your company, depending on the personality of your CEO and your senior leadership, and who your who your prospective customers are. I think all of those things factor into answering the question of, is this right for me? Is this right for our company? And I think that's way more important than to make a sweeping generalization about everybody shoulda, coulda, woulda do anything.
So not to be a little bit thematic, but maybe it's in the interest of any strategic CMO or brand strategist to say a strategy has to come ahead of any activity, including an activity that puts your most influential person potentially and likely out there in a capacity like social media does. Now, I think it's important that we clarify again to the audience, because I think we came out kind of hot and heavy about how no to the CEO on social. And I think that for anyone that's made it this far into the show and is still listening and hasn't started, like I said, throwing darts at us yet, is that we do believe a CEO has a place in publicity and social and public speaking, all these things. And those are very similar, by the way. Social is like a mouthpiece for brands in a lot of ways. It's a channel.
Right.
But what we basically are saying is, should a CEO be in a boardroom or in a meeting with an important client or with an important investor or a bank or whomever it is, or should they be on their on their computer sharing a new article on LinkedIn? And the bottom line is, I think the former has to be done first. But I think what we're really saying is that strategically, comms, PR, social teams within a business can and should benefit from what a CEO can do for a brand online. But I think what we're actually saying is, literally, you look at that study, about 82% of people, if that is the case, what we're saying is, don't actually ask your CEO to spend hours of his week behind his desk using social media. What we're saying is, help use traditional comms methods of, it's just like writing a speech for him. It's just like creating a PowerPoint deck for him.
Or a corporate blog post or whatever.
I'm looking at you, Shelley. I just see that power. It makes me think of that. So anyway, but my point is that we're writing a blog or a press release and a quote. How often is the executive actually the one quoted in a press release? We know it's not really a CEO. It's someone in comms and then the CEO looks at it and goes, okay, quote that. And that's what we're saying is, use that efficiency. So if you have Warren Buffett or you have John Chambers or one of these Ginny Rometty or one of these powerhouse CEOs, Michael Dell, you don't have to be the one actually asking them to type in a tweet, but you can still use their power to get to an audience.
Right, absolutely. So I think it's really important. One of the stories that I like to tell when I'm speaking a lot is a story about one of my clients. It sent me a message that said, hey, we've got an RFP out to the city of New Orleans, and the mayor of New Orleans is like a rabid social media fan, and which is interesting to me, because the mayor of Kansas City is a super social media user as well. Whether he does it himself or not, I don't know. But anyway, and so this client said, the RFP, they're going to make a decision on it this week. It's going to be and this was like Monday. The decision is going to be Thursday. So can you tweet him up a bunch? And so, I tried not to laugh. And what I explained was that, you can't really go from 0 to 100 in an instant and look like anything but an opportunistic person, brand, whatever. You can't just have not paid any attention to what's going on and all of a sudden just inundate this person that's a prospective customer that's going to make a decision about who to hire without looking kind of dumb. And so I think what else is important, and seriously, I mean, this happened, and they took it pretty well when I said it would probably be better for us not to. And that doesn't mean that we can't monitor the conversation and see what else he's talking about and see who else he's talking about and maybe share some of his messaging. But we can't just dive on top of him and start tweeting him up a bunch. That's not, for any legitimate user of social media channels, that's actually going to be more off-putting than anything else. And they were kind of, he was kind of like, yeah, okay, I kind of get it. And by the way, my client did not get selected as a result of this. I mean, not because of the Twitter thing, but for this RFP. But I think that what you have to do is you have to step back from it as you're having these conversations about what it makes sense for us to do from a PR standpoint, from a social media standpoint, from a content marketing standpoint. And when you identify those key leaders in your company that should have a voice, what you also have to identify is who are our key customers, who are our key prospects, and find those people and start connecting with them, start engaging with them, start shockingly building a relationship before you actually need to build a relationship, and that's a thing that it's really difficult for a lot of people to do because it's the internet and because it's social media or because it's blogging, whatever, everybody expects there to be this easy button that you could just push that, everything is just easily done, and that's not how it works. It's like relationship building in real life. It actually takes an effort and a strategy and time. So
I think what you said last there probably sums this up pretty well and kind of takes us towards the end where, we love to deliver some action points here. But the first action point I hear is strategy, strategy, strategy. And we are passionate about marketing and brand strategy. But listen, if you think your CEO should be on Twitter or should be on LinkedIn, think beyond just the platform and where they should be sharing and think about why we're trying to do this. If they can help move a message, then that's great. And then think about, are you actually looking for them to do this, or are you just looking for the value that they can create for a brand?
Right.
Because on the arms of that strategy comes relationship building, right? Sales were built around relationships for a very, very long time. And you will hear me endlessly ranting and raving about one-to-one marketing. Technology has actually brought us to a place where we can create more personalized conversations, more meaningful engagement from one to another, not just blasting people. So if your idea is that a CEO can be, just shooting content out and blasting the world, that's a very broad, almost like a billboard strategy, right? So think about how much you're spending on billboards. Now think about how much you want to spend on that. And what we really need to get back to is thinking about relationships, because that's really what a CEO maybe can do. And I've said this as a CEO, as someone who was one for a B2B company that wasn't in the marketing space. I would go out to a sales call periodically to meet with an important client because I knew that the influence could move the needle just a little bit.
Right.
Social would be sort of that same thing. You do it that same way as, can a CEO getting involved or joining a conversation on LinkedIn or direct messaging someone on Twitter make an impact for business or for your strategy? Then it might be worth getting behind. And I think the third part, which sort of ties to this, is the methods, Shelley. It's the methods of, yes, there's a good chance having some of your senior leadership present on social is important, but the way that gets done can often be facilitated through comms, through your marketing and social teams, and through your business teams to help that person be busy day in and day out, making sure a company's running, financially sound, that customers are happy, that operations are getting done, and that messaging, much like all your other marketing messaging, is happening, and they're personalizing it by putting out their ideas, much like they have done through other traditional presentation methods in the past.
I agree. It's perfectly said. And now I think that this kind of wraps up this week's episode of CMOTalk. We're gonna follow up this podcast with a blog post on this topic. You'll be able to find that on our blog at v3b.com. And we'd love to hear your thoughts on this because I think it's an important topic. And if your CEO is successfully dived into the social space, we'd love to hear what your secret sauce is. And if this is something you're struggling with, we'd love to know your thoughts on it. So thank you for hanging out with us today, guys.
Yep. Hit us up on the Twitters at CMOTalk Live. and we would love to talk. And we, as marketers, are on Twitter, and so you will see us there. We are listening, and we do appreciate you stopping by for another episode of CMO Talk. So we'll see you all soon.